Hello, the Mouse here. Today I'm going to talk about all of the cut content for the very first Sonic game, Sonic the Hedgehog for the Genesis. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about, since there was a lot of cut content for this game, so let's just begin the video. First, let's talk about the new sprites. So there's a lot of new sprites for Sonic specifically. The first one is this one where Sonic looks like he's gulping for air while standing, but he looks like he's screaming. Anyways, it was most likely going to be used for Labyrinth Zone and Scrap Brain Zone Act 3, since those are the only stages that contain water in it. And similar to that, there's also this animation of Sonic holding his breath while running, so this was probably going to be used when the drawing countdown begins. Alright, now let's see this sprite over here. It's very hard to know what was this supposed to be used for, but as seen in earlier development pictures and prototype builds, and it would be seen as Sonic's jumping sprites after passing a goal. Although this sprite would later be used in Sonic Mania when he's doing his little dance after passing a goal. Okay, the next one is this one. It seems that Sonic is sliding on something in the sprite. It was possibly used for sliding a slope, which means they had this idea before Sonic Adventure 2. Nothing too much to talk about. Next one is a sprite that looks like the Spin Dash sprite, although stretched to the sides, and there was going to be a routine which would change Sonic's sprite to one of there. But it went unused, but it's possible that they were used to create a squash and stretch effect when Sonic hit a wall in the game. Moving on from that, there's this Sonic sprite shrinking or maybe falling somewhere, and making a 3D perspective kind of thing. There's no known purpose for this sprite to exist, but it maybe could be when Sonic dies he would shrink. Alright, the next one is weird. It's just a black and white version of the death sprite. The purpose of this sprite is unknown, but would possibly have been used when falling in lava. Although this sprite is present in both Sonic 2 and Sonic CD for some reason, since they also went unused in those games too. Okay, the next one is for a power-up sprite, and this unused set of sprites shows the use of a type of goggle power-up that was not present in the final game. It is currently unknown what this could be used for, but it would behave similarly to the bubble power-up from Sonic 3 that doesn't let you drown in water. Alright, that's all for the Sonic sprites. Now let's talk about the news monitors that were supposed to be in the final game, but for some reason got cut from the game. The first one I'll talk about is the Robotnik monitor, that we all know that when you break this monitor, it damages Sonic, although it was first intended to be a destructible warning sign with no actual gameplay functionality, and this was never in the original release of Sonic the Hedgehog, but later appearing on the 2013 remake and the next games that came afterwards. Alright, the next one is this one. It's just simply a monitor with an S on it. It was originally intended to give the player a speed boost and invisibility, although this was never used, and later in other games of the franchise that came afterwards was used as a monitor that grants you the super and hyper forms. Alright, the next one is the goggle monitors that I already talked about, but apparently it was removed since the programmers were saying that the air bubbles give Sonic some sort of weakness. The last one for this section is the static monitor that literally doesn't do anything. I'm serious. Alright, now let's finally move on and go talk about the unused objects of the game. First one in Green Hill Zone, it was this checkered ball that was first seen in early screenshots. It would be laying around in the zone randomly and you could even push it, but ultimately that got scrapped, and is now seen in the first boss of the game. Alright, the next one is the two totem pole faces that was found in early versions of Green Hill Zone, but it later got replaced with the brown ones we all know. Alright, let's move on to Marble Zone, where there's only one interesting object to talk about, which was this horizontal spiked chandelier object. It is fully functional in the game's code, but still went unused for some reason. Alright, moving on, Spring Yard Zone only got one unused object, which is this leftover from the prototype, that was an unused sign present in the zone style set. Alright, Labyrinth Zone also got one unused object too, which was just Burr Robot facing downward, which the purpose of this sprite is unknown. And guess what? Starlight Zone only got one unused object too, being these unused lights that were used in some prototype versions of the game. Alright, now talking about miscellaneous objects that isn't tied to any zone in particular. And I'm talking about the Unused egg capsule, which was much different than the one present in the final game. And this is the comparison between the Unused one and the one present in the final game. It's so much different. Alright, now it's time to talk about miscellaneous sprites that weren't used in the final game, starting with this sprite with a text that was meant to be used on the title screen of the game, but was disabled due to a programming error involving the Sonic Team Present screen. But ever since the 2013 remake, this got enabled again, as it was intended. Okay, the next one is very interesting. Is this sprite of Eggman's Eggmobile exploding. These sprites could have been used in the ending, since they show Eggman struggling to stay in the air, but their purpose were never actually explained by anyone that worked for this game. Okay, the next one is something different, which is an unused badnik, and it's the only known badnik that got unused in Sonic 1. Anyways, this badnik was cut late from the final game, late in development, although it was later used in Sonic Mania as a badnik in Press Garden Zone. Alright, now there's this sprite of an unused switch which would have a flash animation, nothing too much. Okay, the last three miscellaneous sprites were just effects that got unused. The first one is an unused explosion, the second one being the sparkles effects that was meant for the invisibility power up, and the last one being a smoke effect. And this effect was in the Star Post graphics for some reason. Anyways, now I'll talk about an unused warping effect that was used in the prototype when running into a giant ring, and Sonic would disappear afterwards, and also play the warping noise. To be honest, I wouldn't mind this being the final game, as it looks very pretty. Alright, now we move on to the new sounds and music. First, I'll talk about the new sound effect with only having 4 of them. The first one was a sound effect that was used for when the earlier ball hog bombs exploded when hitting the ground, and when the Buzz Bomber missile made contact with Sonic. The rest of them are sounds that are familiar to the spike sounds in the final game. Okay, now let's move on to the unused music. First, there's this unused version of the credits music with having major differences from the final version. Take a listen. The next one is an unused version of Spring Yard Zone song that featured an extra percussion that was cut from the final version. Take a listen. The next one is the unused version of the boss theme. The difference being that the song was more high-pitched and having some different notes. Here's the song. Alright, the last one is the unused version of the Act Clear jingle. The difference is very minimal, so take a look. Alright, the last cut content I'm going to talk about is the early version of the zones. Starting with Green Hill Zone. This version you're seeing right now is the first glimpse of Sonic 1 that was shown in the Tokyo Toy Show in June of 1990. And as you can see from this image, Green Hill Zone is very different. The sky was way darker than the current version, the mountains were different with few small waterfalls, and the rocks were originally orange. And they were actually in the foreground, which is something that never came to be in the final game. Next up we got the early version of Marble Zone, and as you can see, it's pretty different to the one in the final game. Firstly, there were some floating platforms in the sky and some UFOs in a different build. There were also some different background details and ruins, but that's really all the different stuff. Next one is Parkling Zone, also known as Spring Yard Zone. Yeah, Spring Yard was going to have a different name, and from this image, it shows that it was pretty different. In this version, it was nighttime, and there were more neon lights and signs with text. Alright, now we move on to Labyrinth Zone, where the only major change in it was the background, but nothing really important besides that. So we will just move on to the next one. And the next one is obviously Clockwork Zone, also known as Scrap Brain Zone now. And as you can see, the only major change in the zone was also the background, but nothing really important besides that as well. And that's it. That's all the known cut content for the very first Sonic the Hedgehog game. I mean, I hope that's everything. Anyways, do all the great stuff for the channel, or don't if you didn't like the video. And I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and goodbye.